know, in the U.S. 7th Fleet, there's roughly about 27 destroyers operational in the Western Pacific, U.S. Navy.
The same quality?
And their quality is higher.
So I just want to be clear on this. Even if the U.S. is full will to protect Taiwan, the U.S. might not have the military might to do so.
I believe that is an open question as of today.
What's the possibility of the U.S. and China go to war in the next 30 years?
It's very high in my opinion.
James Fanell, former intelligence chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, challenges the conventional wisdom that the U.S. military is unsurpassed by any force on this planet, while acknowledging that the Chinese military has strategic vulnerabilities. He warns that the U.S. might go to war with China over Taiwan in the next 30 years, not adequately prepared and not confident to win. What needs to be done, and is the current administration addressing these challenges? My interview with Fanell at a critical time when America becomes increasingly wary about China's global ambition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fanell, for being with us today.
Thank you, Simone. Glad to be here.
Okay, so you said by 2035, PLA is very likely to attack Taiwan if the reunification is not done by then. Tell me why you think so.
Yes, I think the issue of whether or not China will use force is dependent on the success of their other strategies to use influence, economics, and diplomacy to pressurize Taiwan into accepting a political deal where they would become part of mainland China in some form or fashion. And China's been trying to work this over the last many years, and they will continue to do that over the course of the next 10 years. But at some point, there's going to be pressure inside the Chinese Communist Party from especially the military to argue that, hey, if these other forms of pressure aren't successful, then we're going to have to use military force in order to be able to achieve our grand ceremony in October of 2049, where we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which they talk about all the time, one of the 2 centennial celebrations that they want to have. So I've called this the decade of concern that starts next year, which is the Chinese military was ordered by Hu Jintao and then again by Xi Jinping to have the capability to take Taiwan by military force starting in 2020. So for the last 20 years, it even started under Jiang Zemin, but for the last 20 years, the Chinese military has been building up its military capability. And Xi Jinping has, given them a new organizational structure in 2015, created the Strategic Support Force, the Joint Logistics Force. He's cleaned out a lot of the corruption out of the military, got rid of the areas of the military that had nothing to do with warfighting, and got them focused on being a true warfighting capability. So starting this next year, the Chinese military is going to be thinking that, well, now we have the capability to physically go out and invade Taiwan. Now, some people doubt that they actually have that, but when you read what the Chinese say, and even what Xi has said, they believe that they have that capability. And that belief is only going to get stronger over the next 10 years.
Okay.
And so the question becomes, how late could you use military force in that timeline from 2020 to 2030 to 2040 and use an invasion and then expect the world to come back to Beijing in 2049 and participate in this grand celebration of the 100th anniversary of the PRC. And I think the Chinese have an example in history where they know it's about a 20-year period where the West will forget what they do.
Okay.
And that example was from Tiananmen Square to the Beijing Olympics.
Okay.
That's 19 years, so say 20. So if you go from 2049 back 20 years, you essentially get to 2030. So from 2020, where they've been told, be ready, have the military capability, till about 2030, maybe 2035, as we get towards the end of that decade, there's going to be great pressure for whoever is leading the PRC to use military force because they know that if they don't use it, then their ceremony will and their celebration will be tarnished, and that the world will still condemn them. And they also know too that, especially with America being non-prepared in this arena, that as America under the new Trump administration starts really gearing itself up to defend Taiwan, that they will be also running out of time. So it's this next 10 years, as I said, is the decade of great concern about what will happen and whether or not the PRC will decide to use military force. So the challenge for America is and our allies is, how do we deter Beijing from deciding to use military force? How do we throw sand into the gears of their machine and make them go back to the drawing board and recalculate, you know, the levels of troops and forces and missiles and bombs and all those things that go into a calculation to decide whether or not to go.
Talking about, you know, deterring China, what about the risks associated with attacking Taiwan? Like, China is not a benign neighbor in Asia. Many countries don't like China. So if China really attacks Taiwan, I suppose Vietnam, Japan, all those countries are not going to like it, and also America. So can China take all these countries at the same time, especially America?
So that's exactly what China has been calculating over the last 20 plus years. And they have built and strategized what they call counter-intervention strategy, which is to keep American military forces at arm's length, if you will, outside the second island chain. The vast majority of our forces, there's some that are permanently forward stationed in the first island chain, in bases in Okinawa and main islands of Japan. But for the most part, the majority of U.S. military force would come from the West Coast. And so the Chinese have developed this counter-intervention strategy to be able to sink our aircraft carriers that would come into the region with ballistic missiles designed to sink aircraft carriers, the DF-21D, the DF-26. They've built a whole litany of missiles, from shore-based ground-launched cruise missiles to air-launched cruise missiles to submarine-launched cruise missiles to surface ship-launched cruise missiles. And then we saw on October 1st in the parade in Beijing, we saw these DF-17, these hypersonic missiles. So they got missiles coming in a ballistic trajectory. They've got missiles coming in on the surface at cruise missiles. They've got hypersonic missiles. So they've got all these missiles coming at our military forces, both those that are in Guam and ships and aircraft that would be coming into the region. So that's their counter-intervention strategy. And they believe that their confidence in their ability to do this is greater and greater than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, as I've been analyzing this, and even 20 years ago. So today they are more confident today than they've ever been in their military capability. And so they believe that they can keep America at bay, and they know that countries like Japan, well, Japan's separate because that'll probably, there's a high likelihood Japan will work with the U.S. on this, but they're not afraid of Vietnam. They're not afraid of Cambodia. They're not afraid of South Korea. They're not afraid of the Philippines. They're not afraid of Malaysia. They're not afraid of these other smaller countries. Now they will be upset, as you say, and there may be some economic consequence to that, but in terms of raw military power, China knows they have to be able to sink the United States fleet and shoot down our aircraft. And if they can do that, they are also betting on the fact that maybe this will be a great deterrent to American morale and will. It's kind of the same way the Japanese thought.
So I just want to be clear on this. Even if the U.S. is full will to protect Taiwan, the U.S. might not have the military might to do so.
I believe that is an open question as of today, that we are not, in my opinion, adequately prepared to deter their decision making on that, let alone to achieve victory. So I think we need to really focus our attention as a nation on building up our military capability and aligning our militaries together. So, like you said, what about these other nations? We should be bringing them into our network of sharing information, sharing intelligence, training together, so that if we do go to a combat operation, which I hope we never will, but if it would happen, the U.S. and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, I don't know about Vietnam, but I mean, we would want to present a united front to China. This may help deter them until we can build enough of our own military capability to really make them recalculate that decision.
So now you're saying, even with the U.S., it still might not be enough.
Well, I would say that people have disagreed with my assessment, but my point is there's less and less confidence in the people that disagree with me.
Okay.
Because China's military capability is so large today and so capable. The missiles that they have and the numbers of ships that they have. I was speaking with somebody on Wednesday at this event, somebody who retired U.S. Navy admiral, and we were talking about, in the U.S. 7th Fleet, there's roughly about 27 destroyers operational in the Western Pacific, U.S. Navy. China has 250. That's 10 times as many. Okay, so
the same quality?
And their quality is higher because a lot of their ships have these longer range anti-ship cruise missiles. If you and I were to start boxing right now, I mean, my arm is longer than your arm. So if I want to hit you in the nose, I got a better chance of hitting you in the nose because my arm is longer. So China's got longer arms than the U.S. Navy right now.
Okay.
That's not good, and we need to reverse that.
I understand that's from the Navy point of view. But when there's war, there's going to be all sorts of forces involved, like Air Force and Army and everything.
They have a large number of fighters more than we do. So Air Forces, jet fighters. Now we have a very good bomber force, but they have a large number of bombers. Now their aircraft maybe aren't as sophisticated as ours, but their aircraft have these very capable long-range anti-ship cruise missiles and ground-launched cruise or air-launched missiles that can strike ground targets. So I mean, they've equipped themselves for this mission of counter-intervention. And so, and they have geography on their side. They have this massive mainland that only has to go a short distance. And we have an inferior number of forces that are in this island chain. And so
yes.
We have to do more in terms of being capable to go toe-to-toe with them. And that's not a popular argument in this town because...
No, it's not like... even saying the words toe-to-toe, like everybody thought U.S. is much superior to any military force in the planet, right?
That's what we hear quite often. I would simply say that in a global perspective, yes, U.S. can project power globally more than any other nation. I mean, we can send military ground forces from the middle of America to the Middle East. We have aircraft to do that. We can fly tankers and refuel aircraft in flight. We can do a lot of things like that. But our forces are stretched around the globe.
Right.
And so not all of our force structure is in the Far East, and it's not all on the West Coast.
Okay.
And it takes weeks to get from San Diego or the West Coast to into the fighting area to support Taiwan.
Talking about modern warfare, does the human experience side matter? I mean, the U.S. has been war forever. China has not fought for a long time. Is that a factor?
I hear that argument quite a bit, which is to say that China hasn't fought a war since 1979 when they fought Vietnam. Now we know in 1988 they actually gunned down some Vietnamese sailors in the South China Sea, but in terms of fighting a war like the United States has, no, they have not. However, the United States has been fighting wars for 30 years since Desert Storm in 1991 in the Middle East, in an environment that's overland, fighting in a desert environment against a very inferior adversary, where our pilots could fly in the sky and never have to worry about another aircraft, where we had total situational awareness and total knowledge of the battle space. We had the ability to command and control without interruption. The fog of war was almost eliminated for our side. Well, if we go fight in China in the first and second island chain, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to fight in an arena where the adversary won't be able to inflict pain on us. So neither China nor America has fought in this environment for a long time. So we're both coming at it at a war at sea environment, if you will, with very little experience.
Okay, you just talked about with Taiwan's situation, if the CCP run out of options, infiltration, stuff like that, they were more likely to resort to military force. So if the red media and red forces in Taiwan are really being cracked down, do you think they can't use that effectively as before? Do you think that will increase the possibility for PLA to resort to force?
Yeah, I think yes. In that case, if their ability to influence the Taiwan people through media manipulation and cyber activity or other things like that, if those were less effective, then this is going to contribute to the decision making to launch. It would, I think, influence Beijing to say, well, okay, this isn't working, so we're going to have to use military force. My point is that there are people that are in Taiwan today that, you have to be wondering that if a war were to start, would those people then start turning around and taking out their guns and shooting certain select people in the Taiwan government to cause chaos and disruption in the military to allow the invasion to be more successful? This is a great concern, and so Taiwan needs to take civil defense very, very seriously. And I think the spy case brings this to the foreground, in my opinion, which is to say the PRC had spies in Taiwan. Were these the only spies? Who else was there? And what were they doing? And how were they getting information? And how were they supported? And who were they working with? And what was their tasking? And what were they going to do if a crisis were to start? Were they just there to gather information? Maybe. But maybe some others are there to do more than that.
I think the Taiwanese people have been asking this question forever, and they continue to ask the same question. That is, if the CCP, if the People's Republic of China decided to use force on Taiwan, would the U.S. really protect Taiwan?
And we have the Taiwan Relations Act that says that, the United States would try to help Taiwan defend itself.
Yeah, it's not definitive.
Exactly. It's not crystal clear that it's not like a mutual defense treaty that we have with Japan or with other nations. So this causes concern, and I know this in Taiwan and other places. All I can say is from my experience in the U.S. military is that we took this threat very, very seriously. And I would just say that it's a known threat, and we are aware of it, and as all militaries do, we do planning and practice for contingencies and prepare. And so, and by definition, our forces are out there, these four deployed forces, the Air Forces and the Naval Forces and our Marines. We're living out there in Japan and in other places, and we're sailing these waters and flying through these airspace, all designed to tell Beijing, you better not do this. Because if you do it, there's going to be a huge cost.
But when it comes down to it, it's the president's decision, right?
Well, I mean, these things take on a life of their own. I mean, sometimes it's congressional support along with the president, sometimes it's the president alone. But yes, it'll become a crisis. And so part of the, I think to your question is, what does this matter to people in America? Why should
Yeah.
the regular person in Iowa or Texas or,
And also, is Trump different from previous president when it comes to Taiwan?
Well, I think the other presidents would say that they were all signaled Beijing that you better not change the status quo in the strait. They said that. And they gave speeches that said that, and their administration said that. But the reality is the status quo in the cross-strait dynamic changed. So they said, don't invade Taiwan, don't do this, don't do that. But China ignored them. So now you have a president that's not only saying that, but he's now taking different actions. For instance, the Taiwan Strait transits by U.S. Navy warships are increasing. And the publicization of those transits to put China on notice that you can't just control the Taiwan Strait. That's international water, and anyone can go there, and you don't own it. This puts a challenge or a pressure on Beijing to figure out how they're going to respond to this international. They don't like bad press, right? So we've created a dynamic where now, if they get angry or they want to say something different, they look bad internationally. They lose face, as they should. So yes, this administration's doing much more, in my opinion, and it's not just building more ships and planes and missiles, which I think is really, really important, but it's also about publicly confronting China's bad behavior. And that's something this administration is completely unique compared to any other previous Republican or Democrat administration. This administration is calling out China's bad behavior, and that's really important. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to change their behavior because the Chinese Communist Party has invested so much of their legitimacy in this issue. So it's going to be, I don't think they're going to walk away and ever say that Taiwan's not part of China. I don't see that happening.
No.
But I think what's important is to be able to say to Beijing, okay, you got away for 40 years of the West ignoring your actions to encircle and take Taiwan. We just kind of look the other way like an ostrich. We put our head in the sand and said, oh, it will never happen because we have the Taiwan Relations Act, and we said maintain the status quo. And we felt so good and comfortable that we said all these things for 40 years. But the reality was China ignored all that and moved towards encircling Taiwan with economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, information warfare, United Front work, and military pressure, hard power. They did all that. So now you got a new administration that's come in and said, I'm going to build up my hard power. Now it's not there yet, but I'm building it up. I'm going to build it up. And I'm not going to sit by and just ignore what you're doing. So at some point, Beijing is going to see this hard power grow. And the question is, will they try to act before they see the hard power from the U.S. and the allies get strong enough to physically maybe stop them or dramatically alter their plan? That's an issue that some people raise, which is to say, by our own actions, we could cause them to attack. This was the same argument that was made before World War II, and it was said that the United States forced Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor because of the policies over oil and Japan's ability to have fuel and energy resources. I don't accept that analysis. I think that's not true. The fact is, Japan attacked America. They took the action. They were provocative. And if China attacks Taiwan, history will judge them in the same way. And so we have to prevent that.
So what's the possibility, according to you, what's the possibility of the U.S. and China go to war in the next 30 years?
It's very high, in my opinion.
Really? And I don't think everybody agrees with you. I mean, probably majority of the American people don't agree with you, right?
I think the majority of the American people are unaware of this issue. You're right, in the elites. I think when you talk to a regular person on the street, they recognize it for what it is.
Okay, so if the U.S. and China will go to war in the next 30 years, what would be the most likely scenario? What would start the war?
I think the most likely scenario is dependent upon what Taiwan does. And so if the people of Taiwan say that they don't want to be ruled by the People's Republic of China, a communist party, if they continue to defy that pressure, like we're seeing in Hong Kong, where the people of Hong Kong say we don't want to live under this kind of system, that then the likelihood of conflict will get greatly increased towards the end of the decade from 2020 to 2030. And sometime in that time frame, the Chinese government will make a decision that says, okay, we have to use the military to get what we want. And it won't just be straight military attack. This will come on probably the heels of maybe an economic embargo, some diplomatic isolation, cyber attack, so the disruption of the key infrastructure capabilities. Maybe the train systems get interrupted in Taiwan, so people cannot travel and go to work and disrupt it, that kind of thing. So these pressure tactics will come, and then China will say, okay, there's this cyber attack. They may not even say that they did it. They'll just say, okay, you're failing, you need to follow what we say. And if the Taiwan people and the Taiwan government resist and say, no, we're not going to be under your thumb, then China will at some point in those remaining years decide, okay, we're going to have to now physically go do something. Mm-hmm. So that's how I think it will unfold at a strategic level. At an operational level, it's quite possible that the Chinese military could be doing exercises like we saw that was reported this year, that unprecedented since the 95-96 timeframe, where China was doing multiple exercises in 2 areas near Taiwan at the same time. So, they do these exercises, and they tell us it's an exercise, we watch them exercise, and then out of the exercise they could launch an invasion. I don't think it's going to be very hard at a strategic level to hide their buildup, to prepare for that. That will be also another pressure tactic, which is to say, if they start moving all their ships out of port, moving aircraft from western China and central China to the Fujian province, if they start moving their missile forces out of their garrisons, and you can't find their missiles, all this stuff will be used as a psychological warfare in Taipei to say, hey, you really don't want to do this, or we will pull the trigger. The trajectory of where I see China going, the PRC going, the strategic trend line of their growth of their military and their ability to inflict an invasion on Taiwan, I see it heading towards the worst case. But that doesn't mean that trajectory cannot be altered. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm calling for is an altering of that trajectory. And so I think this administration has altered that trajectory already for the first time in 40 years. And so I'm encouraged by that.